Hello and welcome to another edition. Well, on this edition of Car Stories, we're going to do a little bit of show and tell. First off, you may not know what this is. Well, probably do. This is an actual V8 engine block. This is an actually vintage Chrysler V8 engine block. It was built in 1964. Was actually built for racing. This was a race block from way back in the day. Still cast iron, weren't running aluminums way back then. But this was actually, a friend of ours actually had an opportunity of digging up a big plot of land just outside of Richard Petty's shop, where they had a whole bunch of old race HEMIs that they had just actually discarded, chucked them out into the field, if you will, and they sank into the ground, and they picked up a bunch of these engines. Some of them had some parts in it that were actually still good. The bulk of them were junk, like this thing. My father gave just not very much money for this particular piece, but as you can see, it's got a couple of pistons in them. It's got number 3, I think 4 and 5, and 6 and 3 are still in this engine. And you can see some of the damage that it actually had done to it, where it actually some of the valve train caught a big chunk, and a big chunk out of the back end of the engine as well. But 64. They only built street HEMIs, built race HEMIs. They didn't build any street HEMIs, so this was a real deal race HEMI. They didn't build first street HEMI until 1966. The sucker was probably running some pretty good RPMs when it let go, but it's a pretty neat piece of NASCAR history, of race history. They didn't actually build until homologation rules back in 1966 when NASCAR and NHRA actually came to them and said, you're going to have to put these on the street if you want to actually race them. So that's a pretty neat piece. I've had it for a long, long time. In the second shot of this engine, we're actually going to take a look at the bottom end. This is where this is where you get to see a little bit more of the damage. As you can see in here, it's got an awful lot of the old connecting rods are still left in this thing when this thing let go. Also, another one, huge hole in the side of it where one of the connecting rods actually came out of the engine. We're actually see over here where you get to see all the freeze plugs are actually wired in. Did that apparently these things were going out at high speeds, or at least at high RPMs. And then the casting dates, and I'm going to put a little picture of these actual casting dates, will show this is a 1964 block. It says cast iron, so it is heavy, 250 some odd pounds. It is not an easy thing to actually lug around. And my plan was, back in the day, was actually to build a coffee table out of this, which I thought would have been really slick. The problem is that weight is very, very heavy, and the old Motorcars Enthusiast headquarters just wasn't going to be a real practical item if we ever had to move to have this thing in there. But it's a neat piece of NASCAR history, and it's a neat piece of racing history. Like I said, there's no verification that this thing actually is a Richard Petty block other than the guy who actually dug it up, so to speak. I figure show a little bit closer shot, especially get to see the size of that hole. Also get to see some of these freeze plugs that are actually wired in, run screws in through them with the wire through them, and then obviously the casting date on the side of the engine, which shows it's a real deal HEMI. It's actually got a pretty good sized fracture over here where something actually hit it. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at this engine. As you can see in here, you can actually see some of the connecting rods are still in existence underneath here. Some of them may have been shaved off, some of them were beaten off as the crankshaft was rotating around. Also notice this, pretty good sized hole in here, in fact about big enough you can almost fit your fist through it. Alright, we're in shaky cam mode now. I'm going to get right down in there where you can get a better look and see what exactly is going on inside there. Pretty massive damage. That one actually doesn't even have the wrist pins even gone out of it. This one's got a pretty good chunk of connecting rods still left in it. This will give you a better idea of how big that hole is. And then I obviously shot at this casting date. And you can see right here this last number, that's 64. That's when this engine was built. Better shot of those freeze plugs as well. That was pretty interesting to get to see. Obviously the engine's had pretty much of a hard life. Look at the stress fracture right in here. We're taking a pretty good hit. Hole's actually in the front of it. Where's from the valve system. You can see how bad the pistons were beaten up in this thing as well. I think the thing was running at a high enough heat, high enough temperature to get a pretty good chunk out of it. There's that big hunk out of the bottom too.